I haven't seen Martin in a long, long time. I think the last time I saw it was, might have been back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I remember, I knew the ending already, and this is a spoiler-filled podcast. So if you haven't seen Martin, not the Martin Lawrence, popular Martin Lawrence miniseries, but the George A. Romero film, Martin. I remember I knew the ending because I used to watch Tom Savini's Screen Greats like over and over and over and over again, and it chronicled Savini's special effects, and one of them was at the end where Martin gets the stake through the heart. So I knew the ending of it. I remember the highlights of it. So I remember seeing it as a kid. I wasn't that thrilled with it. I think I found it boring because, from what I remember, I found it boring because I wanted another Dawn of the Dead. I watched Dawn of the Dead so many times, and I wanted all of Romero's movies to be like that. But it wasn't because, it was a different movie, and it was made before Dawn of the Dead. So now I'm 41 years old, and I figured, well, let me give Martin another chance. Especially since after Romero died, you start to, well, not you, but I started to review, look at interviews and started to think back on his other movies aside from the zombie trilogy, and I really wanted to give him another go-ahead because, like I said, I didn't really remember him, and when you're a kid, you see movies differently. You look for different things. So when I was a kid, I looked for the gore that I saw so much of in Dawn of the Dead that I wanted to see in Martin. So, and then I remember watching Knightriders, which is another kind of forgotten Romero movie, and Romero said next to Martin, Knightriders was like his favorite movie. So Knightriders I'll do for another podcast. So I got Martin. I got it from the library, and my library's been really good about getting movies. I had to order from a separate library, but they got it, so I didn't have to buy it. So I watched it, and I found it cool in the fact that it's very low budget. You can tell it's guerrilla filmmaking. So kind of like how Night of the Living Dead was. It wasn't that big of a crew, and I watched like behind the scenes, the commentary that came on the DVD. There's like maybe 15 people, in the cast and crew combined. But just the way it was shot, the different angles, you could tell it was low budget, but it had that, I guess, that early 70s vibe. And just that independent kind of vibe, just the different angles. It wasn't like I guess the way a traditional movie was shot. So that was cool. The special effects were cool. Special effects were actually fantastic because that was Savini's first special effects movie, possibly ever, but definitely his first work with Romero. So just the scene where Martin slashes the arm of his first victim. Just that alone, because Savini's philosophy was, at least back then, to use as much as the real person as possible. So that was really good. The blood in it, and then Savini was critical of the blood in Dawn of the Dead, but and he was also critical of the blood in Martin. And the blood doesn't look real. It looks like melted red crayon. And it wasn't until the Dick Smith formula. Dick Smith was a legendary makeup effects artist. He did The Exorcist. He had a blood formula that looked great on camera. Savini's blood apparently looked great on stage, but with all the lighting and everything, it didn't look good on camera. It looked like melted red crayon. So now let's just get to the plot. The plot itself was very straightforward. I expected, because I kind of knew what the movie was about, a little more twists, a little more, I guess, less straightforward. It didn't really, and maybe this was by design, it didn't go into, was he really a vampire or was he not? Was he all in his head? He kind of left that open, which is fine. But I guess in the leaving it open, maybe he just left it too open. It was a little too straightforward. So I wanted to find out a little bit like that, a little bit about that. But even if, he wanted to leave it open, I guess it was too straightforward in the fact that he kills people. He kills a bunch of people in it, and then there's a little hinting with the family about the family history, and then the next thing you know, he gets killed by his cousin. So it just, everything, I guess, just kind of happened too quick. I guess maybe I wanted some layers in there, a little bit of more character build-up, some nuance. Maybe he could have had a foil with a police officer or someone trying to investigate him. Maybe a little bit more conflict aside from his cousin who, suspected that he was a vampire. So we never really found that out. Maybe a little more into the family history, if he was or if he wasn't. Maybe a little more into Martin's psyche, even though you kind of got that with the radio interview with the DJs. There was something missing. There was something about the Martin character that was lacking. Maybe it could have been fleshed out a little bit. Pardon the pun and fun. Woo! Fleshed out a little bit. So it seemed that the elements were there, but I just needed something more. The acting was pretty good. John Amplas, who he was also in Day of the Dead, and then he also had quite a terrible role in Dawn of the Dead, where he played a Spanish guy, so they painted his face brown. Romero actually used brown face in one of his movies. Not a good moment for Romero. And then Amplas was also in Knightriders. He played a mime. He didn't have any lines because he was a mime. But he had a good presence to him, his facial expressions, how he was able to carry silence. He did that well. I guess when he did the lines, it just seemed a little too, I don't know, a little too local theater type, and maybe the lines were kind of outdated in that kind of 70s way, like talking about doing it and talking about sex and that whole thing. But just overall a good performance. And he was the main character, so it's someone to focus on. But he actually had a great look for the Martin character, and you can tell that because it was low budget. Romero in some of the other roles, especially like some of the older women, you can tell that they weren't actors and they were just like screaming and yelling all the lines. There was a good. You can tell that the town, I guess it was somewhere in Pennsylvania, it's some factory town. The town itself was a character in the movie, and I think Romero went at great length to make it like that. So when a parade happened in the movie, it was an actual parade, and Romero just shot it, and the townspeople were cool with it. It's like probably a very small town, and they're going, hey, wow, a movie's being made, and this is post-Night of the Living Dead. So Romero did probably have a little bit of notoriety, but not as that much notoriety in the fact that the budget had to be kept low. It probably wasn't until Dawn of the Dead that he got the higher budget and the budget he needed. So overall, it was all right. It doesn't rank amongst his classics like the Zombie Trilogy or Creepshow. Those are my favorite Romero movies. But enjoyable. Like I said, kind of straightforward. I think these days, I guess I'm more of a modern viewer. I expect, I guess a little more of a gray area and maybe a little bit of a twist here and there. And this just kind of came in just out of nowhere that he was killed like that. I was like, oh my god, whoa, just like that, all of a sudden. Like I said, I knew the ending, but I didn't expect the ending to come like that. I thought there was going to be a little more build-up. And there was one more thing. Oh, and Romero's themes about, and this part I thought was good, old versus young, the new versus old. This was in the 70s, so changes were happening, and it was the young people who are now the baby boomers taking over, telling the old people, hey, you've had your chance, it's time for us to take over. Kind of did a shitty job considering who's in office right now, but listen, back then I guess they were a little more idealistic, and I don't mean to paint baby boomers with a broad brush. I am fully aware there are fantastic baby boomers out there. Except they're not really represented the best in government right now. But Romero's take on the young versus old, the rebel against the traditionalist, and Romero was throughout his career, or most of his career, definitely much of a rebel. He always wanted to do things his way, and for the most part he did with very little compromise, with the exception of a couple of movies here and there. He tried his hand at the studio system, and a lot of Romero's career was just, a lot of just waiting around. He would get approved for something, he would get paid, and just things for one reason or another just weren't made. So I would recommend giving Martin a chance if you want like a good glimpse into low budget filmmaking. Film, and by film I mean really using film. I mean, Romero was a true lover of film, a true lover of, physically editing, slicing everything by hand and doing it that way. You can tell this was a labor of love. A lot of work was put into it. Very unique shots, cinematography-wise. It's been a long day. So those parts were good. Good, low budget, but good. I say give it a chance. Don't expect too much. Don't expect to be blown away. Maybe in the 70s, especially with the special effects, they were probably very much taken aback by the effects they saw. I don't know if this was before or after The Exorcist, because Romero's character mentions the Exorcist. George Romero is actually in the movie, and he mentions The Exorcist in it, so I would imagine it was before The Exorcist. Let me just check on the year of the movie. Oh my god, I put Martin. Okay, yeah, Martin was 1978, and The Exorcist, I believe, was 1973. Let me see if I can spell Exorcist right. Exorcist was 1973, so this was before. Exorcist was before Martin, so the special effects in Exorcist were quite unreal. But I think the effects that were in Martin kind of rival it, especially the wrist slashing scene. Definitely, you watch it now and it's like, ooh, even though you know how it's done, it's still ooh. And especially since there was kind of a flub at the beginning where John Amplas didn't get the whole wrist, he kind of got a little of it because not all the blood came out, so it kind of looks like he had to dig deeper into the wrist. So, and then, because it was in the 70s, I guess Martin was he was able to cover his tracks in an easier way. I guess this was before DNA and forensic evidence, and after Martin was killed, he was buried in the backyard. I guess no one was going to miss him. So, I guess you were able to get away with murder, at least in 70s film lore. You were able to get away with murder back then. So you will be getting away with murder if you don't share and comment on this podcast. So please do. You can find me, Mike Lane, on Twitter. I'm at Mike Lane Act. That's MikeLaneAct on Twitter. I'm at Mike Lane Actor on Facebook. You can email me at MikeLaneAct@yahoo.com. And please rate, comment, and share this podcast. I'd love to hear from you. All right, everybody. So until next time, take it easy. Bye.